Robotics projects can include dozens of different folders and hundreds of different files, so it's really important that we keep our projects in Fusion well organized. This video is going to show you a little bit about organization of projects in Fusion and cover some Team 20 practices. So when you open up Fusion, if you click the little grid that's up here in the top left, that opens up your data panel, which shows you all the different projects that you may have open. Individual users will have a team that's just named after them, but when you join the robotics team, Team 20, we have our own project team within Fusion. So to join the robotics team in Fusion, you would need to go to the Team 20 Design Fall Training Google Classroom, and you would need to open up the assignment that says Join the Team 20 Fusion. In here, there is a sign-up sheet where you would put your first name, your last name, your school email, and your grade, and then the CAD leaders will invite you to the appropriate projects within Fusion. We manage the projects one project at a time, so you can get access to the ones that you need to be in. Rookies would get access to this year's Rookie Robotics project, and varsity team members would be getting access to the varsity team project and whatever relevant folders you need in there. So let's take a look inside of a completed season's project to see what this looks like. Within the 23-24 robotics project, we have folders set up for a number of different things. The bulk of the work really goes on inside of the main robot design, but in the preseason, this folder might not even exist yet. There's probably mainly work going on in the preseason folder. So we try to keep things organized in relevant project folders within this space, and we try to minimize the number of loose files that exist outside of the different folders. So if we go into the robot folder, within the actual competition bot project, you find subfolders for the various different subsystems of the robot. So we keep things organized this way. If we're working on an intake, then all of that goes on in the intake folder. If we're working on a shooter, then all of that goes on in the shooter folder. And in this particular year, there were a number of different shooter concepts being worked on by different people simultaneously. So people created their own folders to put their parts and pieces into, and once it became clear which one was going to make it onto the competition bot, that folder got developed further, and all of the parts for that shooter wound up in here. You'll also find inside the robot project a folder called General Parts. General Parts includes a lot of COTS parts, which we can oftentimes download models from the different suppliers. So we don't need to sit down and go through the work of designing a robot signal light because we can download that component. And so that part lives in the general parts folder. As a rule, anything that you want to use from the general parts folder is fine to use in your work, but you should right-click on it, create a copy, and then place that copy into the project folder that you're working on, and never ever edit the original files that exist here in General Parts. When Team 20 creates assemblies within Fusion, all of the different parts and pieces that are in that assembly are what's referred to in Fusion as components. They're separate individual components that get brought together and assembled. Now, components in Fusion can be one of two kinds. They can be internal components or they can be external components. External components are saved outside of this Fusion file somewhere in the folder structure. And this is how we should do all of our components. Everything that goes into our assemblies should exist in the folder structure with its own identifiable name, because sometimes those components need to be referenced or need to be used in more than one subassembly, and we want those to exist out here externally in the project folders. The only time that we see internal components are normally when we download something from a supplier's website, like a gearbox, for example, and those components are going to come in with a whole bunch of separate, different internal components. All of these components that I'm clicking on to highlight exist within this Fusion file. They don't exist externally in our folder structure, and that's fine. We don't need to keep all of these separate components in our folder structure if they're just part of this subassembly that we've brought in. So when you're working in an assembly, avoid creating new components within that assembly because somebody's going to try to refer to it, create a drawing from it, use it in another subassembly, anything like that, and it's going to get really confusing really fast because it's not in our folders and it's buried deep down in an assembly somewhere. Another really crucial tool that the design team uses outside of Fusion is the part number registry. So when we're looking around in Fusion and we're checking out these folders for different subassemblies, like the intake, you'll notice that there is a certain naming convention that we stick to for all of our parts and pieces and for our assemblies. So all of the intake parts start with a 3-letter abbreviation, INT, for intake. The shooters start with SHO, the climbers start with CLI, and those help us easily identify which folder and which part of our project we would find that part in. Then it's followed by a number, and the number is unique to that part. We shouldn't ever have duplicates of the same number. And then we have a descriptive name for each part. So it's no good to just create a component and name it thingamabob. We need to try to find names that are descriptive. And as you create these parts for a mechanism for the competition robot, those part names get jotted down in what's called the part number registry. So this is where, if you're designing the frame, we have certain file names set up already. So different pieces of frame rail would get different part number designations. And then this spreadsheet, by the time the season's through, looks really busy with all the many different parts and pieces. And this is a really crucial way for us to keep on top of and manage the different parts that we're creating, and understand who worked on those parts, who approved those parts, who actually did the drawings for those parts, and where they are in the process, whether they've been approved, completed, printed, etc. So anyone on the design team should have the part number registry file bookmarked, saved in a place where they can easily open it and access it on a daily basis.